Hi everyone, welcome back to the Ice Kitchens again. And for today's guest Master Chef appearance, I would like to introduce Mr. Gert Pretorius. Hello.
Hi.
Good morning. And Gert's given up his day off to come in today, so we're very appreciative of that. So thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure.
And you've driven a long way too, so I'm sure that these guys are going to really love what you show us today. So as part of our cultural diets and our awareness of foods from around the world, Gert is South African by birth, and we thought we'd ask Gert to come in and show us some of his favourite dishes from when he was a kid, things that resonate with your South African background and things that are very, I guess, a little different to what we're used to.
Yes.
When we think of South African food, I don't know what we really think about the cuisine, but would you explain what you think a good description of South African cuisine would be?
Well, South African food, very much like Australian food, is all built upon the immigrants that we had in South Africa. So
Okay.
South Africa's history started off with the Dutch spice traders stopping off in Cape Town on their way to India. Later on, we had the English colonists come. So there was. That's
We're British go everywhere.
We're forgiving you for it now.
Yes.
So the English colonists came. That is the big influence on what we call our national cuisine. We've incorporated a lot of the native or the Bantu tribes cuisine into what we consider South African cuisine. And that has formed over the years, has built into what we know as a South African cuisine, including some of the, unfortunately, the slave trade that was there, the workers that were brought from Southeast Asia, very specifically the Malay people, from the Indonesian islands, which is one of the dishes that we're doing today. Is called Buburti, which has got very strong Malay origins, and we see that through the use of the spices and the aromats that I have. That has very much become a part of what we know as South African cuisine.
I didn't know that before, so I'm glad you're doing that. And it's amazing, isn't it? I'm English, obviously, and I live in Australia, and the influence of Southeast Asian cuisine in Australia is evident. And I think we should embrace. I mean, it's a melting pot, our country as yours.
Absolutely, yes.
To embrace a little part of every cuisine and create an amazing cuisine that's either your own or just using some of the influences that you've seen.
Yes.
And we've seen a little bit of that in Australia as well. Someone once said to me, what is Australia's national dish? You've lived there for 30 years. I'm like, well, you could live in Australia for 100 years. I'm not sure that we have a national dish.
No.
But it's the incorporation of everything, isn't it?
Yes.
And the best of everything that we see and learn. And the native spices and the native herbs and the Aboriginal way of cooking and the Indigenous way of cooking, as you said before, go back to that. That really is the native Australian dish, isn't it? Or what should be, other than the lamington and throw a steak on the barbie. I can't believe I said that, but kind of is the feeling. But Gert, we're so appreciative of your time. I know that these guys are going to enjoy watching some of your favourite dishes. So the floor is yours. I'm not going to speak anymore, which is unusual but true. I'm going to back away. But keep watching, this guy's amazing. Working at the Wharf at the moment with our great friend and supporter Josh Lopez, just around the corner. And I know you've had a lot of other experience, which I'm sure you'll talk to the guys about. So thanks so much.
Absolutely.
And have fun cooking in our kitchens.
Thank you so much. Right, so we're going to start off with a savoury dish, a savoury beef dish known as Buburti. Now, Buburti, like I mentioned before, comes from the Malay origins of the slaves and the workers that were brought over to work in the sugarcane fields of the eastern part of South Africa, the southeastern part of South Africa. The Buburti dish originated with beef mince, but over the years we have started using a combination of pork, lamb, and also venison to make this beautiful dish. What we start off with is a curried mince that we then add a custard, egg and milk custard on the top and bake, so to form this beautiful rich crust on top of the mince. We'll also be making what we know as funeral rice. Funeral rice is a spiced rice that we finish off with a honey and nut butter and some dried fruit. The reason it's called funeral rice is it's traditionally served at funerals or wakes because it is a sweet way to send off the dearly departed. Now the spice, the sweetness and the nuttiness also very much suits the Buburti and is very much a traditional accompaniment. So to start off with, we're going to lightly toast all of our dry spices. We're going to have a combination of a madras curry powder, cumin, coriander, cinnamon, and turmeric, and just a touch of ground clove. Now, this is a very spice-heavy dish, very specific because of all the aromats. All the aromats come through beautifully. You're going to end up with a very nice, very nicely balanced curry mince. We just want to start off with over a low heat as to not burn the spice, but you do need to toast the spice to release the aromatic compounds and get it as beautifully toasted as possible before adding in the oil. Now, while this is already heating up, you can definitely smell the spices coming together. Just the little bit of heat that's in the spice is releasing all of the aromats while we're cooking it. All right, so the spices are nicely toasted now. You've got a beautiful, beautiful aroma coming off of them. So at this point, we're going to add some oil into the spice, just to wet it a little bit. This oil will infuse with the spice that we have, and we'll be using this base to lightly saute our onions and garlic. At this point, it is important to remember that we still don't want to go over a too high heat, because we don't want the onions or the garlic to burn, and we definitely don't want the spice to burn while we're working with it. I'm going to add the 2 cloves of garlic and the chopped onion in. And we're just going to allow that to very slowly sweat down in the onion, in the spiced oil. All right, so while our spices and onions are slowly sauteing, we're just going to start cooking off our ground beef. I find that cooking the beef in a couple of batches always gives a better result. Depending on the size of your pan, either do it in 2, 3, or 4 batches, making sure that there's enough space in the pan for the beef to keep moving. If you have the beef all sitting on top of each other, all you end up with is a stewed mince rather than a browned mince. And that's not something that's just, you lose so much beautiful flavor stewing it rather than properly browning it. And my technique for this is as simple as it possibly gets. A nice hot pan, a little bit of oil, just let the beef sit in there and keep stirring. So now that I've got my first batch of ground beef just sauteed off, I'm going to remove it from the pan using a spider to try and retain some of that rendered out beef fat. There you go. We've got the rendered out beef fat and oil I started with. Don't want to lose any of that flavor while I'm doing the next batches. And this is also the same pan I'll be using to finish off the mince part of the Buburti dish. So now I'm going to add in the second batch of the beef mince. Again, enough space in between the clumps of mince for the meat to move freely. That way we know we're getting the best possible saute on the beef. We don't need to cook the beef out entirely, as the dish will still be going back into the oven for another hour. This is just to get the flavor of the sauteed mince. Okay, so now we've got our onion and spices sauteed off. We've got our beef mince sauteed off. I'm just going to transfer the cooked beef mince into our onion and spice mix. At this point, we're going to start just a braise down, very similar to an Italian ragu style braise. So we've got our base, we've got our sauteed base, so the onions, the garlic, and the spice. We've added our mince in. We're going to turn the heat up to a medium level. And you can see in the pan the spices already starting to stain the beef a nice, beautiful yellow color. And this is exactly what we want. This is all about that curry background, but not a spicy, not a burnt curry, also not very saucy in the end. We will be serving it with some beautiful condiments. But for us, this dish is very much about that balance between sweetness and spice, a lot of savory elements. But the balance of the sweetness and the spice comes from the fruit chutney that we're going to be adding in at this point. Now, Alison has very kindly provided me with a beautiful spiced fruit chutney. When I make this at home, I've got a big jar of an apricot chutney that I made. I managed to get an entire box of apricots and apples for next to nothing from a fruit store close to my house, and they were just on the point of going off, which is exactly what you want for chutney. That preserving. I've got that preserving fruit. So now I've got a massive jar of chutney that goes into absolutely anything I can get my hands on. We're also going to be adding in some dried sultanas, rather dried currants. That's going to get a nice stir through, just make sure it's nice and evenly distributed. Now that's nicely stirred through, all we're going to do is add some breadcrumbs that I've soaked in a little bit of milk. Now you can use either fresh or dried breadcrumbs for this part. All the breadcrumbs does is they add a little bit of structure to the dish at the end. Then we're going to break them up a little bit. Make sure they're nicely evenly distributed. The breadcrumbs can easily be replaced with a stone, or rather a stone ground oats flour, or an almond flour, whichever takes your preference to keep it gluten free. All it needs to be is some kind of an element to absorb some of the extra liquid without drying out the dish entirely. Getting some beautiful smells of the mince and the fruit chutney coming off of here now. The spices are just so aromatic at this point. And once we have it in the oven, the entire house, the entire kitchen and house will start smelling of it. And that's that very good childhood memory of coming home and smelling the toasted spices and knowing that Buburti is in the oven somewhere. We're just going to add in some beautiful beef stock. And we're going to let that braise down until there is no more liquid evident in the mince, rather just the beautiful concentrated flavor. I mentioned before that traditionally we make this dish with beef mince as it was started because it's very commonly available, but we also do use lamb, we use pork, and we do use venison as well. Now venison to us, or to South Africans, is a very important protein because there's such a variety of venison available. In Australia, when we think of venison, we generally think of white-tailed deer, or white-tailed buck. But in South Africa, venison is a collective term for so many different proteins, and they vary beautifully between the smallest springbuck, which has a very light red meat, almost veal or lamb-like in appearance, all the way to kudu, which is an enormous antelope. It can grow up to 900 kilos. When you get the meat of the kudu, it is dark red, very similar to what you'd expect from kangaroo or emu. But it's so beautiful and rich, nicely marbled, and just an intense flavor. Right, so now we've had a little bit of time to cook down the beef stock into our mince. As you can see, we've ended up with this beautiful, almost porridge consistency. They've got the raisins and the currants through there. The chutney is just beautiful. The sweetness and the aromas coming off it is absolutely delicious. So at this point is where I'd like to season the beef. So we're just going to add a nice big pinch of salt, or season to taste, and stir it through. And then just a good taste, make sure that the seasoning is right, and also try not to eat too much of it before it goes into the pan. Exactly where we want it. So at this point, what we're looking for is for that balance between the sweetness, the savouriness, the little bit of spiciness. And that is exactly what we've got now. It's just a really nice balance. So for this dish, you've got essentially two ways of finishing it off. The way we do it traditionally is we'd bake one big dish of this, spoon it out, serve it with the rice and the condiments. Or if you are cooking for a little bit more of a presentation, if you're trying to make a bit more of an impression, we can always go the individual route, which is I'll be making one individual one as well. We're going to be spooning the mince, the curried mince, into your baking dish, flattening it out. Just like that, nice and evenly spaced. And then we'll fill one individual ramekin as well. Beautiful. Sides. Right, so we're just going to give that one or 2 minutes just to cool just a little bit. While we're doing that, we're going to be making the custard that goes on top. So the custard we have going on top adds a nice level of richness to it. It's also the signature look for the Buburti. We're cracking 2 eggs, 2 whole eggs. And adding in 200 ml of whole milk. To this we'll be adding just a small touch of turmeric just to have the nice, bright, vibrant color on top. I'm just going to lightly whisk these together. Until you get a nice, you get that egg and milk custard. Just combined, no need to over whip it. So I've just lightly combined the milk and the egg with the turmeric. No need to over whisk it or beat air into it. It's just combining at this stage. Then we're going to just pour a little bit on top of the dish, keeping in mind that it does grow quite a lot, so there's no need for it to be really thick. Just a very light layer of it. So these are just going to get put into the oven now. We've got the oven set at 180 degrees. And it will take approximately 1 hour, 50 minutes to 1 hour to bake. What we're looking for is a nice set consistency. All right, so now that we've got the Buburti in the oven, that's going to take for about 50 minutes to an hour to bake. We're going to start working on our dessert, which will take a similar amount of time to bake. So hopefully by the time the Buburti is out, we're getting that served. The dessert will just about be ready to come out, and we'll be able to serve it nice and hot. Now, the dessert we're doing today is a Cape Brandy tart, which is very similar to what the English have as a sticky date pudding, but except that we've now got an added alcohol to it because, of course, South Africans, we need to add booze. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with some boiling water. That's 250 milliliters of boiling water, into which we're going to be adding the just chopped medjool dates. And dates is such a beautiful sweetness to them. Which adds that nice richness to the dessert, but also they have a natural gelling and setting agent which helps beautifully to set the dessert. Once the water has come to a boil, we're going to add the dates in. Just break them up into the boiling water. Until they're completely immersed. And then add the bicarb soda. This will help with the raising agent. It will also react to the acid in the dates. You can see that starting to foam up beautifully now. What we got there is a reaction between the acid in the dates and the bicarb soda, creating that leavening effect. This is going to be a beautiful leavening paste. It also breaks down the dates into a bit more of a paste. Now we want to steep that for at least 5 minutes. So while that's happening, we're going to start the batter for our dessert. Now I'm doing it in a KitchenAid, but you can do it by hand or with a hand mixer as well, depending on what you have available. We're going to start off with our 125 grams of unsalted butter. I always end up using unsalted butter when it comes to pastry work, simply because you can control the amount of salt you get in there, but also there's a little bit of an unknown is how much moisture the salt in the butter has actually absorbed. You can control the moisture level in your pastry a lot better when using unsalted butter. With the unsalted butter, we're going to be adding 150 grams of caster sugar, and we're going to cream those together until they're a nice light cream color and very fluffy. Again, I'm using a KitchenAid for this with the paddle attachment, but an electric whisk works as well. I'm going to start off on a slow speed just until the butter breaks down and the sugar becomes incorporated. And slowly tick up the speed a little bit as we go. Once the butter and the sugar has been incorporated into each other, I'll kick it up to a medium-high speed and let it do its thing. So generally this takes 2 or 3 minutes just to get the desired result. Pausing every now and again just to scrape down the sides of the bowl to ensure that you have the most even possible result. Now, South Africa is very well known for our brandies. The Kavivier distillery in Cape Town and Stellenbosch has won many international accolades on with competitions including French cognacs, and has been put aside some of the best cognacs in the world. This is a beautiful climate for growing the grapes, and we have some of the best pine in the world, and we also have some of the best distillers in the world, so we have won a lot of accolades for our brandies throughout the years. But it's also such a big part of our South African culture. Brandy is one of the favorite spirits in South African drinking culture, but also we use it very often in cooking, such as the brandy tart. Now that our sugar and our butter is nicely creamed, we're going to start adding the eggs in one by one. Just going to turn the mixer off in between, but we do want to add the eggs in and mix them really well into the sugar and butter mixture to ensure they're nicely emulsified. You add them in one by one. Mixing at a high speed just to make sure the emulsification into the butter and sugar mixture holds. Just before I add the second one, again I'm going to scrape down the sides of the bowl to ensure that we get the most even possible result. And now adding the second egg in, and again whisking at high speed to ensure that the emulsification is complete. As you can see, we've got a nice light cream color. It does look slightly broken, but that is because the egg and the butter doesn't fully emulsify until we add the dry ingredients, but it is all very evenly sized and there's no excess liquid from the egg sitting on top. At this point, we're going to be sifting in the dry ingredients into our wet ingredients, making sure that we get enough aeration through the flour and the bicarb, both to disperse the baking powder evenly into the flour, but also to add just that extra touch of leavening. Lightly sift that over a nice distance. Get enough air in between the individual grains of the flour and the baking powder. At this point, we want to be careful not to over mix our flour, as we don't want to build any gluten, so we're just going to use a folding technique to get the flour mixed through our egg and butter mixture until we have a nicely incorporated thick batter. No extra mixing, just nice and smooth. We are now going to add in our chopped pecan nuts as well as our dates that we macerated in the boiling water before. And you'll see that it comes together into a nice medium thickness batter. Nice smooth consistency. The smell of those dates is just absolutely gorgeous. Sweet and dark. And at this point, we're just going to be adding in approximately 2 milliliters of fine salt. Stirring it through, and then I'm going to be spreading it evenly in a prepared baking dish. I've just sprayed mine with aerosolized oil, but a baking dish can be prepared with butter or with oil rubbed on the sides as well. This is just to help release the tart once it is fully baked. Pour it into the prepared baking dish. Spread it nice and evenly. And before it goes into the oven, we're just going to decorate it with a few pieces of whole pecan nuts. Just dropped wherever you feel like. A nice little pattern. They will bake into the cake, but they'll be able to see them sitting on top. At this point, we're going to be transferring this into our oven, again at 170 degrees, for approximately 50 minutes to 1 hour. And into the oven we go. Alright, so now we've got the Buburti and our dessert in the oven. They're just baking away. We're going to start our funeral rice. Now, as I mentioned before, funeral rice is a traditional accompaniment to Buburti because of the sweetness counterplays very well with the spicy sweetness of the savory mince. But at the same time, the funeral rice is also a traditional dish served at any funeral, at a wake, because of its sweet nature. It does have we've used it as a connotation for a sweet send-off to somebody's life well lived. We're going to start by boiling our water for the rice, and into the water we're going to be adding orange peel, turmeric, cinnamon and cardamom. This is just to flavor the water, and this will also give a really nice flavor to the rice. So we're going to add in the peel of one orange. 1 cinnamon stick and 3 cardamom pods. And we're just going to let that come to a light simmer before adding in our turmeric to stain the water. This will give a nice flavor to the water, but it will also stain the rice yellow, which is a very iconic part of the funeral rice, is using yellow rice. Now while that's coming up to the boil, I'm just going to wash our jasmine rice, just wash off the extra starch that we have, just using cold water. We're going to put it into a sieve and just wash it, rinse it with the cold water until the water runs clean out of the bottom. Now, as our spiced water comes up to a boil, I'm going to stir in the rice. And you will notice that I'm using the boiling method of cooking rice as opposed to a braising or a steaming. I'm going to stir the rice in there. And I'm going to allow the rice to boil at a medium simmer for approximately 10 minutes. During this time, it will absorb all of that beautiful spice flavor as well as the turmeric. You will notice that I did not add any salt into my boiling water. This is a little bit of a trick that I picked up over the years, and many people will argue with me about this, but I've always find that the salt breaks down the outside husk of the rice kernels a little more. You end up with a bit more of a sticky result. But more importantly, with the boiling method specifically, it is very hard to gauge how much salt will be absorbed into the rice at the time just by tasting your water. It's easier to have the rice boil in your spiced water and then season afterwards. You have a much more control over the amount of seasoning that goes into your finished product. Now we're just about ready to pull up a Buburti out of the oven. We can smell it all over the kitchen. It's just a gorgeous scent. Oh, look at that. These are just baked beautifully. That's going to be delicious. Our rice is now coming up nice and yellow. We're just about a minute and a half away from pulling it off, and they're starting to look nice, beautiful and plump. Our rice is beautifully cooked, nice and plump. Now we're just going to drain off all the excess water. You see the rice has taken on the really beautiful yellow color of the turmeric. That's it, just nice and spiced rice. We're just going to pick out all of the spice that we added in. There's nothing worse than biting into a piece of cinnamon when you're halfway through your meal, except maybe biting into a piece of clove. There you go. Orange peel. Spices discarded. We're going to let that sit while we make our syrup. Our rice has turned beautifully yellow, but that is only half of what identifies this as what it is. So for the next part, we're going to start off with some unsalted butter again. Then we're just going to melt in a heavy base saucepan. So what the idea here is, we're going to be making a beurre noisette, which is the nut brown butter, and at the same time we're going to be toasting our almonds into the butter. It's a bit of a 2-for-1 deal, but what you end up with is a really beautifully flavored nut butter. So our butter is almost entirely melted now. We're going to add in our slithered almonds and just begin the toasting process. At this point, you really can't take your eyes off it because the butter turns within an instant. We don't want any burnt almonds throughout. And once we start seeing that nice foaminess of the butter as the water is reducing off, we know we're just about a minute or so away from the browning process starting. We're going to be adding in our currants so that they can absorb some of that buttery moisture and become nice and plump with all the flavor. Definitely getting some of that nutty scent out now. You see as I'm drawing it away, there's definitely a little bit of color from the butter and the almonds coming along. Just
just lower the temperature a little bit. And there we go. Now we've just hit the start of our nut butter process. We're going to turn off the heat. There's still a lot of residual heat in the pan, so we don't have to be worried about not being able to pull it through. And when we're happy with the color and the toast that we have on our almonds and in the butter, we're just going to add a small amount of white wine vinegar. Now, the acid in the vinegar actually helps stop the Maillard reaction. So the browning of the butter and the nuts stops in that instant when you add the acid in. It also gives a nice little bit of an acidic balance to a very sweet finish. Now, while there's still a little bit of heat in there, we're just going to stir through our honey. And there we go. So that's our dried fruit and nut honey butter that we will be folding through our rice to serve. At this point, we can definitely say that almond and currant is not the only flavor combination that you can use here. It is the more traditional one, but I've done the same with pecans, pistachios. It's really beautiful with walnuts, especially paired up with dried apple, diced dried apple. All of it with the honey and the little bit of vinegar makes for a really nice funeral rice. We're just going to transfer our drained rice into a bowl where we will be stirring through the nut butter. Add the nuts into our rice, mix it through. And this is now the point where we will be seasoning, because remember we had no salt in the cooking water, so it does need a fairly heavy season. Want to make sure that is where we want it. Just beautiful. So we are just about ready to serve our Buburti with funeral rice. We're just about ready to serve. We've got our individual Buburti, our funeral rice, and some condiments that we generally refer to as sambal, again from the Malay word, where sambal olek is a very specific condiment. We've taken the word and just turned it into what we have condiments to alongside. We have diced banana, a fruit chutney, and some desiccated toasted coconuts. All right, so our brandy tart is just about to come out of the oven. We're just going to start the syrup that we're going to be pouring over it now. What we have in our pot is 250 milliliters of water that we're just bringing to a light simmer. We are going to be adding our brown sugar to that and stirring to dissolve. This will come up to a boil. We're just going to let it simmer for 2 minutes before adding our brandy and our butter. Now, it serves to be mentioned that a lot of you would be thinking, why are we calling this a brandy tart when we don't have a pastry base? The simple explanation is it is simply a vernacular in South Africa. At some point, dessert and tart were started using interchangeably, and it's just a name that stuck. So Cape Brandy Tart would be a brandy pudding from the Cape Town region. This has got this up to a nice boil now. Add our butter in, stir that through. So our butter is starting to melt. We're going to add in our brandy. This is a beautiful St. Helena's imported brandy. But I do urge you that if you do have an opportunity to try a South African brandy, KWV or the like, definitely take the opportunity and try what the New World brandies are like. Now, we're just going to let our syrup simmer on a medium-low heat while we pull our brandy tart out of the oven. Nice and gorgeous. You'll see the dessert has gone quite a dark brown color. That is exactly what we're looking for. Beautiful, spongy and bouncy to the touch. So we're just going to be stabbing a few holes through the tart to help with the saturation of the brandy syrup. The best way, of course, you want this is hot syrup over the hot pudding. Will give you the best absorption. And now just pour. And we're just going to let this sit for a couple of minutes just for the syrup to absorb beautifully into the pastry. Now, while our brandy tart is cooling and absorbing that delicious syrup, we're just going to make a very simple accompaniment for it. All I've got in here is some double thick cream, or clotted cream works beautifully as well, and we're just going to zest some lemon into it. The tart itself is quite sweet and rich, very delicate and dark, but just a little bit of acid and cream for the counterpoint is all you need to serve it with. So to serve, all we're going to do is going to scoop a nice big serve out and top it with our flavored cream. Naturally, you can bake individual Cape brandy tartlets. You can cut them out whatever way you prefer to serve. What I prefer to serve is in honor of my grandmother. A nice big spoonful of our brandy tart. And a very generous dollop of our lemon cream on top. And that's it, our Cape brandy tart with a lemon cream.
So that's the end of our cooking demonstration today, guys. I'm sorry you don't get smell-o-vision through the camera, but you saw some amazing food. Matt, doing the photography and filming, and I smelled the beautiful smell of that rice and all the spices in your beef dish, and then this amazing low-calorie, sugar-free, fat-free dessert thingy that I'm going to have today.
Perfect for a diet.
Say that to myself so I can eat it. But yeah, I tasted everything and it's amazing. And I'm so grateful that you came in to share some of that amazing knowledge. And you cook from the heart, which is what I love.
Yeah.
And I think my inspiration came from my nan and my grandfather, who was a chef. I never met him, but that feeling in my family has always been of, cooking at home. And my nan's casseroles and stews and old-fashioned things are just some of my favourite food. And I know you mentioned that was your grandmother's dish as well. So I think watching you guys, remember that. Remember to cook from the heart and to remember everything you've learned in your lives, and not just chefs that you've worked with, but from everything. And both of us as immigrants to this country, we can talk about our food, and that's how you learn from other chefs. And so if you do work with people in your kitchens that aren't from Australia, talk to them about their food. And like Gert today, he talks to us about the origins of some of the food and the Malaysian origins and some of those other backgrounds that I didn't know about, and the Afrikaan and the use of all the spices through the spice traders years ago. It's very interesting, and I'm sure you would have appreciated all Gert's knowledge. It's wonderful food. Thanks so much for coming. It's been great having you in our kitchen.
Thank you.
Hope to see you back soon.
Thank you
Thanks
so much.
for watching, guys.
Thank
See
you
next
guys.
time.